Indeed, since this is the last event of the day and you're then about to fly off into nature, I thought it might be helpful to provide a bit of a perspective on networking. And in particular, what I want to do is I want to give you maybe what will be a new and hopefully refreshing perspective on networking, and at the same time introduce you to some like really high-powered tools that can help make networking a lot more effective for you, but also a bit more fun. So, why does networking matter? In part because, technology and the transparency that comes with the internet just makes the search for jobs extremely competitive. But in a COVID environment, because we're more isolated, it's even more important to be networking. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to kind of go through, I'm going to introduce you to 4 people that have influenced me, kind of like they're part of my influencer world. And I'm going to share with you their perspectives and try to collate them all together into something that hopefully is coherent for you. So maybe just a little bit about me. So I have, in many ways, a very traditional path. I worked in industry for a few years at KLM. I got my business degree at the University of Chicago. Then I spent a lot of years in consulting. But for the past 6, 7 years, basically, I've been working a lot with students, mostly business students, where I teach essentially like very applied business skills of a variety, in a variety of areas. And one of them is precisely on the topic of networking. But more interesting than me, I think, is more the perspectives of these 4 people that I want to introduce you to. So the first one is Matt Youngquist, who is the president or CEO of Career Horizons. And basically, here's what I learned from him. I think I always kind of knew it on some level, but he confirmed it. That if you think about all the jobs out there, 30% of them are advertised, but 70% of them are not. I don't know if you realize this. There's many reasons for this. It turns out that for a lot of companies, it's very difficult to advertise. It's a lot of work, it requires a lot of skill, and so on and so forth. But beyond the reasons, they don't really matter. It's these numbers that matter. And so the implication for this is that if you only have, if your sole strategy to look for jobs and internships and opportunities is to rely on the advertisements, then basically you're really, really limiting yourself, right? So how can we get access to the invisible part of the iceberg? And as you can imagine, networking is going to play a big part of it. Now, second perspective from a second person. This guy, Victor Cheng. Maybe some of you who are interested in consulting have heard of this guy. If you haven't, don't worry. Super, super bright guy, ex-McKinsey. And I think he has a very interesting perspective on networking, as you can see, right? That basically, like over the long run, your career potential is going to be a combination of your, intellectual horsepower, but also your whole relationship horsepower. And as it turns out, the relationship horsepower ends up mattering even more. So another way of thinking about this is that just doing good work, is if you just focus on doing good work, you're missing an opportunity. What you really want to be thinking about is holistically including networking. So I know I'm telling you about why networking matters, but I can imagine that the more I tell you about why networking matters, the more you think, yeah, I know. But like inside, you're kind of thinking, ugh, networking, yuck, ooh, right? It's something, it's kind of gross. It's kind of like fake. It's kind of disgusting. Some people use it, or it can be scary, right? Scary to approach people we don't know. Scary to approach people who are more senior. Maybe it's like we don't want to bother them. I mean, basically, there's all sorts of reasons that basically mean that, like, even though people on the one hand, they know that networking is important, on the other hand, they don't do it. So what? What can we do about it? Well, this is why I want to invite you to think about think about a completely different way of looking at networking. So maybe the first thing, to be really, really, really clear, good networking is not about asking for a job, And it's not about saying, hey, look, you know, I saw that you advertised for this job. Can we talk about it? It's not about that. And if you make the decision up front that you're not going to make or you're going to make networking about something else and not that, already it relieves a lot of pressure from you, right? And so that's a good step. Now, the second thing is that, you know, we tend to think of networking. I mean, when we think of networking, this is kind of like the image that comes up, right? Big career fair. We're competing for attention with a lot of other people. You know, it's really hard to like say something to get somebody's attention. Some people are like very aggressive. I mean, this is kind of like a terrible, terrible looking environment. So this is the image that we often have of networking. But actually, the kind of networking I want to talk to you about, the kind of networking that is far more effective, is a very different kind of networking. It's this kind of networking. Basically, like a relaxed, one-on-one conversation with somebody really nice, where you're getting to know each other a little bit, and where that person is helping you. That's the idea, okay? Now, you know, I told you that I teach networking, and I want to share some perspectives that some students, some master's students that I've worked with already this year, so just in the past few months, have shared with me about their experience with networking. You know, this is basically the result of some networking conversations that they've had, one-on-one, with complete strangers. They asked those strangers to have a conversation, and this is the kind of stuff that they wrote in their kind of like reports about networking, right? So a lot of them basically overall kind of found it to be a really, really pleasant experience, like much, much better than what they kind of feared. A lot of them talked about the fact that they learned a lot of really, really useful stuff. Some of them talked about the fact that like the person that they were engaging with offered to connect them to other people. And even better, some of these networking conversations were already like a significant step forward in getting a job. Even though the students didn't ask for it, it turns out that like, you know, it naturally came in the conversation in a way that wasn't strange at all. Usually because it was the other person who was offering and who brought it up. So, you know, networking can actually deliver really, really great results in a very pleasant way. And in fact, the more you network, the more the quality of the gains that you get increases, and the more people actually are willing to help you. It's really kind of amazing. So this is a bit of a segue to the third person that I want to introduce you to. It's Adam Grant. So Adam Grant is this phenomenal professor of organizational psychology at Wharton. And he wrote this really interesting book called Give and Take. I mean, basically, Adam Grant is like one of the areas that he's really passionate about is understanding how people build and curate their networks. But so here's kind of like the key takeaway from all this, a lot of this research that he's done and that he describes in his book. Is that takeaway number one actually is that if you know, the world of people out there kind of like divides into like three groups of people. So you have the takers, who basically are people who tend to be primarily focused on their own benefit. So they don't really worry too much about helping others. They're primarily focused on their own gain. And so takers will tend to ask you for things, but they'll rarely offer something back. And when you ask them, they'll usually say, sorry, can't help you, things like that, right? So there's a kind of they're a minority, but they're a sizable minority. Now, there's also the matchers or reciprocators. So basically, this is a great majority of people. They tend to operate on the basis of reciprocity. So if the idea is that like if they give something, they kind of expect something back. And if they receive something, they kind of feel indebted, right? And maybe that resonates a little bit with you. But I think the really interesting folks out there are the givers. There's basically people who give without expecting anything back. A lot of them, as you can see, about 25% of them. So they give without expecting anything back. And so you might think, okay, yeah, but the givers, they're the rollovers. They're the people that everyone takes advantage of. Well, you're partially right, but mostly not. So yes, there's a small portion of givers who get completely taken advantage of, but the majority of givers actually give under a certain set of conditions, and they've kind of honed the skill at giving so that they don't get taken advantage of. So that's kind of the insight number one. It's about this population distribution. But what's insight number two is that it turns out that givers are far, far more successful than takers and matchers. Really. So why is that, you might say? Well, it's simple. It's because, you see, when the givers, by giving without expecting anything back, because they don't have any agenda, because they don't ask anything of anybody, they tend to earn people's trust very quickly. And because they earn people's trust, essentially what it means is that their networks grow. And because their networks grow, they can also start playing the connector role. So they connect people in their networks, right? And that makes them even more powerful. And of course, it helps the people that they connect. So why am I telling you about all these people? The takers, the matchers, and the givers. Well, because the givers, by definition, they love to help. And they love to network. Oh, and by the way, they still do get something out of it. They get a lot of benefit out of it. Maybe the sheer pleasure out of it, maybe giving something back because they feel like they received a lot of help 5, 10, 20 years ago, and now it's their turn to give back. So they have a lot of reasons to give. So what I'm kind of suggesting to you is, when you're thinking about networking, think about looking for givers and connecting with them. There's more than enough of them out there that if you basically focus your efforts on them, you're going to have a great time, you're going to benefit, they're going to enjoy it and benefit, and basically it's kind of a win-win, and you don't have to worry about the more selfish takers and so on. So maybe you think, yeah, but maybe that's kind of a little bit manipulative. And so, if I just look for givers, and what I would say is, it doesn't have to be, because you see, I don't think that anybody is born a taker or born a giver or whatever. I think there's a giver in each one of us. There's a giver in you, there's a giver in me, and so on. So what I would invite you to kind of think about is, what if you can kind of like reconnect with the giver self in you? The person who is a bit more humble, a little bit more gracious, a little bit more grateful, a little bit more willing to offer help. And you go in with that mindset, trying to go look for other people who have that mindset as well. And so when you do connect, essentially you are starting the process of building a mutually beneficial relationship. And that really is how we want to think about networking. It's about building mutually beneficial relationships with people that we like. So all that sounds nice, but practically, how do I do it? Well, practically, this is the fourth clue, Steve Dalton. So I love Steve. He is a career coach at a business school in the US. He's also the author of this book, as you can see, The 2-Hour Job Search. It's really a brilliant book. I know you might think, oh, another book, and I already have like a huge pile of, huge list of books that I need to read. If you want to kind of skip the book, there's a nice webinar that describes the book in 45 minutes that you can watch. But anyway, I'm going to give you kind of the key highlights, and hopefully it'll make you want to go watch the webinar or read the book. But anyway, here's kind of like the point of what Steve is talking about. Steve realized, about 10 years ago that with the onset of the internet and platforms and so on and so forth, it meant that online job adverts started, and as a result, companies started getting completely flooded with advertisements, with people submitting their CVs, their cover letters, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, a lot of companies stopped doing that for a lot of jobs. But for the jobs that were still advertised, it's just this massive, crazy a competition. And so point number one, if you just send your CV and your cover letter, it's really not the most effective strategy, because you're only, first of all, you're only targeting the advertised jobs, and two, there's a gazillion other people who are doing exactly the same. And it's very hard to differentiate yourself simply using CV and cover letter. So how do we bring the humanity back into it? And this is a little bit what Steve talks about, is using, it sounds paradoxical, but it's using technology to bring the humanity back into the whole process. So how does it work? Hold on. I'm trying to, yeah, so here's the thing. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to reach out to people to ask if they're willing to have a conversation with you. And here is basically the template email that is recommended. And as you can see, it's called a 6-point email. This is the newest, latest, greatest version. It's called a 6-point email. And there's 6 reasons why it's called a 6-point email. The first is that it's very short. And this matters, because if you send long emails, basically people don't read them. Either they don't have the time, or they're already anticipating, long email means that I have to reply with a long email. I don't have the energy to do this, or at least not now, so I'll do it later. So long emails are not your friend. You want short email. Second thing is that most of the words in there are actually not about you, but they're about the person to whom you're sending this. And so that feels already different. And third, notice that there is no reference to any kind of job here. You're just asking for that person's insight. Now, what else is going on here? In this email, basically you identify yourself as somebody who has something in common with the person to whom you're writing. So you want to look for people with whom you have something in common. Use it, for example, using a LinkedIn search. And then you write to them and you identify upfront this basis for connection. You see, this basis for connection really matters, because it triggers the tribal feeling in us. We talk about communities all the time, communities, communities, communities. And communities matter, because it's a way of appealing to our own sense of identity and belonging, right? And so this is exactly what this gets at. Fifth point is that you're actually asking something very concrete up front. You're asking for a few minutes of this person's time in a conversation. If you don't ask for something concrete, it's very difficult for them to reply, right? So you want to ask them, give them a very easy question to answer, very easy question to answer. And lastly, there's the point about describing an area of interest which is both narrow and broad, which basically increases the chance that they will be okay to talk to you. There's more detail in the webinar about the logic of this point, but it makes a lot of sense. So anyway, the broad point about this email is this, is that this was actually, this is an email that Steve perfected over about 10 years or so through massive amount of experimentation. So if you think, I think you've just been in a conference that is partially about startups. And in startups, one of the things that we do is basically we develop like a beta version of some kind of product, right? And we try it, and then we test it with the public, and we see what works, what doesn't, and then we come up with the next version, and so on and so forth. So this email is kind of like the way it was developed. It was like developed like an app by constantly testing it with the market. So this is the result of, it's in a sense scientifically tested. And it's based on some pretty deep psychological principles. I alluded to some of them about the tribal feeling and so on and so forth, that are well researched. So basically, if you want to use this email, then you should use the writing religiously, and only change the green. Only change the green part. It might feel weird to you. You know, it might feel like, ah, man, this is not me, et cetera, et cetera. I know it might feel strange, but it works. It really works. Because the point of this email is not that it should make you feel comfortable, rather is that it should be effective and actually trigger positive responses from the people to whom you send it. Let me show you that it works. So recently, just a couple months ago or a month ago, I worked with master's students at Rotterdam School of Management, and I asked them to send the email. And here you see the result. So from the students who answered the survey, you know, they sent a total of 870 mails, and about, you know, more than 200 triggered a positive response. So basically, 217 complete strangers replying to those students saying, yes, I'm willing to have a conversation. I mean, isn't that amazing? This is a success rate of 25%. I don't know if you know, but like if you do like a typical like email marketing campaign, your success rates are going to be something like 1 to 2%. Like 1 to 2% is a good success rate. This is 25% success rate. Yeah, and this is despite in COVID. You know, the numbers are a little bit worse than they are typically. So as you can imagine that once we get out of COVID, it'll be even better. So it works. I think what's really important here, though, that I want to say is that, you know, you need to send at least 15 of those mails. Because if you only send one, you know, there's a 75% chance that you don't get an answer. So then you're going to be like, well, it doesn't work. If you only send 4, there's a very high chance that you get 0 answer. So you're still going to think it doesn't work. So you need to send at least 15. And then you can kind of expect more or less that you're going to get 3 to 5 positive responses. And of course, there's always, you know, a few positive outliers. I mean, I had a student last spring that was really amazing. He sent 15, and he wrote me a mail. He was like, Nicolas, this is unbelievable. You know, like I'm still not finished sending all 15 that I'm already getting positive responses back. That was Mohammed from Lebanon who told me that. So that, you know, there are these incredible stories that come out. But even beyond that, there's also the stories of like what happens after those mails. The kind of connection that takes place between two people who before that were complete strangers with each other. So here I'll share an example with you. There was this student of mine from, again, Rotterdam School of Management, who 2 years ago, he told me that one of the people who responded positively to him, it was this woman who somehow really like took a liking of him and told him that she would really love to mentor him in his job search. And he felt, he was very grateful, of course, but at the same time, he felt he wasn't sure that she was the right person, in part because he had a very specific geographic interest. So he told her, you know, thanks a lot, I really appreciate it, but you know, what I didn't tell you is that like my focus is really Uruguay. Like in the end, I really want to get a job in Uruguay, and you know, I don't know if you can help. And she said, oh, you know, Uruguay, that's amazing. My husband is from Uruguay. Let me connect you to him. Right? So you have these kinds of stories that emerge from basically, you know, triggering serendipity. So once you actually get those positive responses, of course, yes, you should have a conversation. And so how should you think about these conversations? Well, you know, of course, at the beginning of the conversation, you should give them a little bit of context. Who you are, you know, the kind of career you're thinking about, maybe how you're thinking of, you know, what you'd like to achieve maybe over the next couple of years, or maybe what you're not sure of, and essentially what you'd like to accomplish during this conversation. So why you requested this to speak with that person. And then what you want to do when you get into the content, you know, the real meat of the conversation, the psychological sort of like flow that you want to go into is first position the person like an expert, because we all love to feel like experts, you know? Every time somebody tells you you're an expert or something like it, you kind of feel like, oh yeah, that feels good, right? So you position the person like an expert, and that creates the basis for you to then transform them into a mentor. Because you see, if they're an expert, then of course you can ask them for advice. Yeah? And so for that, there's kind of like a flow that is recommended. First you ask about trends, then you ask about their insights, then you ask about assignments, but essentially the kinds of projects that are done in that environment. Then you ask for advice, and then maybe ask for resources. And resources includes contacts, right? What's important here is that like you're not, the point is not at all to sell yourself, not at all. It's actually, in many ways, it's a lot more about them than it is about you. And everything that you do in there is designed, of course, for you to get some useful info, but also to make them like you, not because you're a great product, but more because you're a really great person, right? You position them like experts, you honor them by asking them for advice, and then at the end, you kind of close it by recapping what you learned from the conversation. Then they can appreciate that you were really listened. They can see how they are making a difference or they made a difference for you. And then you offer to help. Remember, we talked about reconnecting with our giver self. So offer to help. And you don't need to know how to help in order to make an offer to help. Most likely, they're going to say, oh, that's really nice, don't worry. Or if I think of something, I'll let you know. Most likely, that's what's going to happen. Maybe they'll say, yeah, actually, there is a way in which you can help me. And then they'll tell you, right? Look, I've never heard of a story where somebody kind of like decided to abuse the person they helped by asking for something, you know, inordinate or completely like excessive. I've never heard of such stories. So offer to help with sincerity. Most likely, you won't have to do anything. And you'll be giving back later, 5, 10, 15 years down the road when, you see people, younger people, who are in the same shoes that you're in right now. But you don't have to know how you want to help in order to make the offer of help, right? I mean, hey guys, how can I help? We ask this all the time, don't we? So, you're about to go into nature. You're about to go, look for opportunities in the Netherlands here. So the takeaways for you today. Networking, it's really helpful to find opportunities because there's so many jobs, so many opportunities that are hidden. Remember that givers love to help. So go network with them, give them a chance to help because that's what they're kind of craving for. Use the 6-point email to reach out to them, right? It works, it's scientifically tested, so don't change it. Don't change it, just apply. This is one of those rare moments in life where you just apply the bloody recipe, the formula, right? And once they've said, okay, I'll speak with you, then position them as experts and convert them into mentors. And remember that throughout you want to connect with your giver self, the more noble part of you, because that's when you don't feel dirty and instead like you feel like, hey, it's actually okay that I'm asking for help. Thank you very much.